So welcome back to another video here in Pennsylvania. As you can tell by the title of the video, we're going to be talking about treasure today, or the possibility of it. It's a series I've been thinking about working on for a while, doing a video series on different treasures that you could possibly find in Pennsylvania. Although this state is not necessarily known for the possible treasures it contains, there are plenty of legends, and this is one of them. So we are in Mifflin County today, which is kind of in central Pennsylvania, and our story takes place on the other side of that mountain, actually. Of course, according to some versions of the story, there could be some treasure up at the top of that mountain as well, though. But as with all stories about treasure and hidden loot, there's different variations of it. We'll talk about a couple of those. So this is the story of a train robbery that took place back in 1909 in a place called the Narrows, the section of the train line between Lewistown and Mifflin. And we're going to head to that location next. I don't know the exact location. No one really does. They say it's about a half-mile east of the town called Hawstone, which is hardly much of a town at all. So we're going to head to that area. I'm going to tell you the story. Like I said, there's some different variations of it. Then we'll talk about the real possibility of there actually being some treasure up on top of the mountain or down below somewhere. We'll talk about the reality of that. Because some of these legends, are just that, legends. But this one, well, unless you know the story, well, you'll find out later. And then if there is actual treasure up there, we'll talk about what it is and what it's potentially worth today. So let's head over to the actual spot on the other side of the mountain. So we are now here roughly in the area where this robbery took place back in 1909. So this is Route 333. That way is Lewistown. And back that way is, I think, Mifflin and the towns of Port Royal. I think just a little ways up there is like that little tiny town of Hawstone, like I mentioned. Let me give you a view of where we're at. Right down here is the railroad bed, which still exists today. So here's the road to Lewistown. Here's looking down into what they call the Narrows. Down there's the Juniata River. You can see the railroad tracks right down there. And it's those railroad tracks down there where this robbery occurred. Of course, across the river is the modern, that's Route 322/22 over there. I travel that all the time. I think just right over there is the access to like a boat ramp too. So this is where we're at. But you can see the steep terrain that we're dealing with here. So this is a view of the area from the other side of the road. Of course, right there's the railroad tracks. The robbery occurred, maybe not at this exact spot, but nearby. And the road where we're on is up there a ways, but you can see the mountain there, and the mountain on this side. This is why it's called the Narrows. There's modern highway right there. And we have a train coming through. How appropriate. No money on this train though. But this steep terrain of this area here, known as the Narrows, does play a part in the story, or at least in its interpretation of what happened here, I believe. But let's find a place, let's get off the highway here, head up in the woods a little bit, and we'll tell this story. Like I said, we'll start out by telling the story. Whoops, I won't slide down into the Narrows. And then we'll talk a little about the potential of there being treasure still up here. Alright, so I believe I found a nice little spot here up on the hillside to tell you the story. Once again, I'm going to show you just how steep and rocky this terrain is, because I think it plays a big part in the story and its interpretation, like I said earlier. So once again, out there is modern Route 322. The river's down there and the railroad tracks. Here's our highway. It's my Jeep, and then here's what the terrain looks like up this way. Yeah, rough terrain. Alright, so let's get to telling this story. I do have some notes with me, so you may see me look down every once in a while at my notes. But this story, or this legend, whatever you want to call it, takes place back in 1909. And that year is kind of important because of the coins that he took, or that were given to him from the train. If you're a coin collector, the year 1909 might be significant for you, depending on what kind of coins we're talking about. But yeah, I came across two different dates. One said December 1st, 1909. Another one said August 31st, 1909. Like, so that's the problem with these stories. There's different variations of it. But regardless of the date, down here in 1909, the train, I think they call it the old train number 39, was coming from the east, from Mifflin, heading west towards Lewistown, down here on the tracks below us. And all of a sudden, an explosion occurred under the train, did a little bit of damage, causing the train to stop, plus the conductor, the engineer, what do you want to call him, wanted to stop the train to find out what happened, if any damage occurred. And when they did that, it says a figure appeared out of the darkness with like a homemade mask made out of a burlap sack with, the eyes cut out for holes. And he had 2 pistols in his hand and sticks of dynamite sticking out of his pockets. And so obviously he was there to rob the train, which was a little unusual because it was just one person. But that kind of plays into a different variation of the story too. Some accounts think that there was more people here, but across the river, that were going to be working with him, because they did see during the robbery, they saw some strange lights on the other side of the river. I'm guessing there was a road over there as well back then, not the modern highway, but some, much, older road, I guess you could say. But yeah, anyway, and there's still debate too as to whether or not he intended to just damage the train or to blow the train off the tracks entirely, because yes, the charges that he set just did some damage to the train, but some people think the charges were intended to ignite other sticks of dynamite to do more damage to the train. There's different variations to the story on that as well. But anyway, it did a bit of damage. The charges were set to go off as they were set on the tracks themselves, so as the train went over it, it set the charges off. So it damaged the headlamp, I guess blew out, and what they call the cow catcher in front of the train, I guess that's where it hooks up with other locomotives and stuff. It did damage to those parts of the train. Of course, at that moment then, he demanded that they open up some of the train compartments and start emptying out bags of money for him. It was known, this was a passenger train, but it was also known that it was carrying money as well. And here's once again where the accounts differ a little bit from each other. One account says that he brought his own burlap sacks for them to fill up with money, which doesn't quite fit with the other stories, since most of the accounts mention that the bags were sealed, sealed bags of coins that they just gave to him from out of the different train compartments. So more than likely that's the way it was, because they were, even today when they travel with money, it's in sealed bags. So, oh yeah, at one point he decided they weren't working fast enough, so he opened fire on them and wounding the conductor. It didn't kill him, just wounded him. So then they did work a little bit faster. And they brought off a number of different bags full of coins for him. And once again, there's different accounts. One account says that there was 6 bags, all filled with pennies. That comes into play in the video here, or in the story. Other accounts say that there was just 2 bags of pennies, 1 bag of gold, about $5,000 in gold, and then a bag of about $100 in silver, and then a smaller bag of $10 in silver. So it depends on which story you read about what the money was. But one thing the stories agree on is that there was a lot of pennies involved in this story. So once he got them to get all those bags of coins off the train, he did force some of the men to carry them a little bit of ways away from the railroad tracks. Some stories say he made them carry them up the mountain, but I showed you how steep this mountain was, and I don't think so. I think he just wanted them carried a little bit of ways from the train a bit, which fits one of the other stories. And then he let the train go. Let them go back to Lewistown. The train still ran, it was just damaged a little bit. Of course, at this point, he didn't have a whole lot of time, because as soon as the train gets to Lewistown, they're going to tell the authorities, and there's going to be people here, in not too short order. Well, I should mention too that this robbery took place at like 2 in the morning, so it was over. It was not in broad daylight; it was at night. But let's come back to that one story mentioning there being lights on the other side of the river, because right down there's the river. Of course, the railroad tracks are right down there too. And it is unusual that he would try to rob a train by himself, and attempt to carry all those bags of coins by himself. Those bags of coins were not light, so it makes sense that perhaps there was other people on the other side of the river working with him that were going to bring like a raft or a boat across. They would load the bags of coins up on that raft, take them back across. Instead of, as more stories say, most stories say, trying to take the bags of coins all the way up this steep mountain, which is almost, just climbing up here was kind of difficult. Imagine trying to carry 20, 30-pound bags of pennies and gold up this mountain. So I do think that he had other people that were going to work with him, but somehow things fell through and didn't happen like he was planned. So like I said, that's how I'm going to interpret things. I'm not sure who in their right mind would want to carry 20, 30-pound bags of coins up the steep mountain. It's pretty remote up there even today, but I don't feel Like, why would he take that many bags of coins if he's just working by himself? You only have so much time before the authorities are going to come. I mean, Lewistown isn't too far up that way. They're going to be here in no time, and you're going to get caught. So it only makes sense that he would have other people with him too. Just makes more sense to take it across the river. But anyway, back to the story. So when the authorities did come back here, they were able to recover all the money except for $65 in pennies. So what happened? So once again, depending on which version of the story you hear, the version with all 6 bags being pennies was that as they were laying next to the railroad tracks, the bags of pennies, they probably carried them a little bit away from the tracks. He slit the bags open to see what was in them, and he realized all 6 bags contained pennies. All newly minted 1909 pennies, which once again comes into play. If you're a coin collector, you might know what I'm talking about. And it comes into play with their potential value if they were found today as well. So in his disgust that they're all pennies, he just left most of the bags down there close to the railroad tracks, and then tried to take 2 of the bags with him. But as they searched the area, they did find, I think, both other bags too, slit open with a lot of the pennies dumped out. They were able to recover most of those except for the $65 in pennies. But that's still a lot of pennies. That's 6,500 pennies, which, according to my calculations, still weighs close. That would weigh close to 40 pounds. 40 pounds of pennies to try and drag up the mountain with you. But the other variation of the story with the silver and gold bags is that the penny bags would have been the heaviest, heavier than even the gold and silver bags. So some people think, according to that story, he took the 2 heaviest bags thinking that would contain the most money. It contained the most coins, but they were pennies. And so he left the other bags down below with the intent of maybe coming back for them, but realized he didn't have much time, so he just grabbed the 2 heaviest bags and took off with them. And then, once again, they found them further up the mountain here, slit open. That's when he, got up, he realized they were pennies and was like frustrated and just maybe took what he could, left the rest here. So regardless of which version of the story is true, they all have one thing in common. About 2 bags of pennies were found up this mountainside a little bit, or maybe even a little bit further down. There's quite a bit of a hillside going down that way too, down toward the railroad track. So maybe down there or up this way, down 2 bags of pennies that were slit open. A lot of them were spilled out over the ground, but like I said, there were still $65 in pennies. About 6,500 pennies were still missing. And maybe still up in these mountains somewhere. And you have to keep in mind too that at the end of the day, they weren't really concerned about the loss of $65 in pennies. I mean, they would have been worth more in 1909, but considering that the possibility that there were bags of gold and silver coins involved and that those were left behind and recovered, that's what was important. And so that's the story. And no, he was never caught. When they arrived on the scene, the detectives and the police, they did find his mask down by the river. So he went down by the edge of the river to hide his mask, but I also think he went down by the edge of the river. Like I said, I think he had people that were working with him, and he went down to the river maybe to signal them to see that they were there, and not sure what happened, but something fell through, and that's maybe when he came back up this way, grabbed what bags of coins he could and started to head up this way instead. At least that's how I would interpret it. So they did bring dogs to the area to try and sniff him out. They're the ones that found the mask down by the river, but so many other men had been walking around in the area that the dogs were unable to, follow a scent up the mountain or anywhere. So the story then is that somewhere up in these mountains is 6,500 pennies laying up here somewhere. So is there any truth to this story? And are these pennies worth anything? If they're only worth 1 cent, it's still $65, which, I'll take. If I thought $65 laying out here in the woods, I'd take it home. But we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, is there any truth to this story? And the answer is yes. Back in 1954, I believe it was, 3 hunters out here returning home from a hunting trip found something very interesting. Yes, so as they were returning from a hunting trip, not sure if it was how high up on the mountain it was, if it was higher up this way because it's pretty rocky, or it could have been, like I said, down further below, closer to the railroad tracks maybe. There's quite a distance to get down to them. Not sure if this road was here back then either, but somewhere around here, like I said, about half mile east of the town of Hawstone, in a rotted old stump, they found like a little remains of a burlap sack with 3,700 pennies in it. So it's 3,700 pennies in a rotten stump and like a deteriorating burlap sack. And when they looked at the dates, guess what the dates all said? 1909. So that's definitive that those coins were from this robbery, because it was confirmed that that train was carrying newly minted 1909 pennies. So indeed, that brings truth to the story that there was a robbery here and that pennies were taken. All right, but you do the math then. So 6,500 pennies were missing, 3,700 were found. That leaves 2,800 pennies still missing. And where are they? Are they still out here in these hills? Or did he take those pennies with him? I think I calculate that still comes out to about 20 pounds of pennies. Of course, pennies back then were all copper, or 97% copper. Today they're more cheaply made with zinc, so they don't weigh as much. But it would about $20 in pennies, roughly. So did he take all those with him, or did he hide those out here somewhere as well? Or are they just laying out here somewhere? That's the mystery now. So there is indeed treasure, in a way, perhaps up in these hills yet. You know, the question remains, did he take all those pennies with him? Or like I said, or did he leave them out here somewhere as well? And is discussed, you know, 2,800, that's only $28 in pennies. Was that even worth, I don't know, maybe he's probably in a hurry too, so I'd imagine maybe he stashed those somewhere too, just to give him a chance to get away. Because like I said, the authorities were going to be here in no time, and he needed to get out of here. Because like I said, I think his original plan failed to meet up with some people on the other side of the river. I feel like he just kind of got abandoned all of a sudden. He was on his own. So I feel like, in a way, he panicked as well. If he was trying to rob the train all by himself and take all those bags of coins himself, that didn't seem like the brightest thing to do, but maybe he wasn't the brightest apple in the bunch either. So yeah, then there is a very real possibility of being able to find those lost pennies out here in the woods of Pennsylvania yet. But that raises the question, what are they worth? So I am going to take some time here to talk about the potential value and worth of that hoard of pennies, if indeed it still is out here. As I mentioned before, 1909 is a special year in penny history. It is a transition year. Every now and then, the U.S. Mint, changes the design of the coins, and that was what happened in 1909. Up till 1909, but about 1857 to 1909, they minted the familiar Indian head pennies. But 1909, they transitioned to Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln being on the front of the pennies. But they're still a little bit different than what we have today. They had wheat ears on the back of them. They're often called wheat cents. But 1909 was the first year that those were minted. So a 1909 coin in just what we'll call good condition, is one of the lowest grades you can find them in, is worth about $4. According, if you could probably get one on eBay for $4. So do the math. 4 times 2,800 gives you $11,200. So that's a lot better than just getting $28 for them. So yeah, in good condition, they'd be worth, if you found all 2,800 of them, they'd be worth over $11,000. Now some people will say, weren't they newly minted? Yeah, but that was in 1909. That was over 100 years ago. The coins, remember those 300s that found the 3,700 coins? The coins they found were extremely corroded and not in great condition at all, because they've been out here in the woods for so long. Copper corrodes after time. A lot of the pennies were kind of stuck together and had that green corrosion all over them. So you're not going to find, if you did find them, they're not going to have that newly minted, bright, shiny look to them at all. So if they were in that condition, they'd be worth a ton more money, but that's not the condition they're going to be in. I found some treasure forum sites that were indicating that, if you find these coins they were newly minted. Yeah, they were, but like I said, they're going to be lucky if you even get like a good condition on them. But there were some other varieties of the 1909 penny that year. There are different mints that mint these coins. Prior to this time, most pennies had been minted at the Philadelphia Mint, but starting in 1908, they had started minting some at the San Francisco Mint out west, just to provide coins for a growing population out west. The coins minted in San Francisco have a little S, a little mint mark it's called, on the back of the coin. So they did mint some of those in 1908 and 1909 for the Indian head pennies, and they did as well for the Lincoln penny. We'll get back to those in a moment. But there's also a different variety. Initially they had I think it's the engraver's initials, the guy who designed the penny, VDB on the coin initially, but then they took those off later that year. So there was very few pennies minted with those initials on it. And the ones that do, they're called 1909 VDB coins. Maybe I'll put it down here. They're worth $15 in just good condition. So do 15 times 2,800 and you get $42,000. But the likelihood of all 2,800 of those coins being the VDB is unlikely, but hey, if they were, that's what you would get. Let's go back to the S minted coins. The 1909 S, these are even rare because not as many were made, the S minted coins from San Francisco. In just good condition, which is one of the lower conditions, they're worth $75 a piece per coin. So do the math. 75 times 2,800, if my calculator is correct, $210,000 potentially out here. Minted, S minted ones. But I'll get to that in a moment. They're likely not the S minted ones. I'll get to that in a moment. So I'm gonna build you up and then pop your bubble. All right. But then remember the VDB. There were a few VDB initialed ones made at the San Francisco Mint too. So a 1909 S VDB in just good condition is worth $600. Do the math, times 2,800, $1,680,000 worth of pennies out here, if that's what they were. But like I said, now it's time to burst your bubble. They are most likely not S minted pennies. This train was coming from the east, from the Philadelphia area, I believe. I think some count said Philly, some said Washington. They were newly minted, so they were probably minted at the Philadelphia Mint on their way west. Probably not to California, but they came from the east, so they were most likely not the S minted pennies. So, but some of them could be the VDB, making them a little bit more valuable. Sorry to burst your bubble. So there you go then, that's the story. Like I said, there is a strong possibility of there being real treasure up in these hills somewhere, just waiting to be found. So what do I think of all this? I find it very intriguing. Like I said, a lot of treasure stories that you hear about in Pennsylvania turn out to be not really true or kind of iffy. But this one, yeah, like I said, in 1954 they found 3,700 pennies out here, all minted in 1909. So that story is true, and there's still pennies missing from that. So who knows? But this, as you can see from the camera, this terrain is rugged. Walk around here looking, who knows? There's so many rocks, so many places to hide. Let me just give you a quick view down here. Yeah, so let me just show you the area even where I'm sitting. There's all kinds of little nooks and crannies where you could hide something. I mean, this is just one little area. Stuff a bag of coins down there. Back down there looks like a little cave area. Just rocks everywhere. So if he did stash even down there, I mean, who knows? It would take forever to, I mean, I guess you know, even with a metal detector, it would take years to, you know, canvass the whole mountain. And who knows if he even went up this way, or who knows if they're even out here. Like I said, he might have taken it all with him, what was left. But who knows? Yeah, so once again, there you go. That's the story. But before you come out here looking with a metal detector or whatever, make sure that you're allowed to do so. I know up further on top of the mountain, it's state game lands. You're not allowed to metal detect up there. And I'm not sure who owns all this land along this hillside here. It's not posted, but it probably belongs to somebody. So, you know, before you come doing stuff like that, you know, from watching this video, make sure you do your research and your homework to make sure you're allowed to do so. I, for one, am not going to go looking, at least not today. Make a cool video sometime, just to go searching for it, but that won't be today. All right, folks, but awesome story. Like I said, it's rare sometimes to find a treasure story that actually has real truth to it, but this one does. But as always, folks, thanks for coming along, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you on the next treasure story here in Pennsylvania.